I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello horror hounds, welcome to my horror house. Now you know how it can sometimes be with Hollywood. You wait ages for a Robin Hood movie or the tale of a meteor on a collision course with Earth, or the simple parable of a volcano erupting in America, and two come along at once. Well, that almost came true in the early 80s for the slasher set at summer camp. We're going to be looking at The Burning today, which is a material lesson in the importance of getting to market first. It would be very easy to see 1981's The Burning as a bit of a rip-off of Friday the 13th from the year before, although the 5-page treatment had been created in 1979 and was registered in 1980. Friday the 13th came out first and The Burning came out a year later, and in this battle of summer camp set slashers, history dictated that The Burning would be Betamax to Friday the 13th's VHS. But is that a fair assessment? Because for every 10 households that bought a VHS recorder, you'll get one nerd like me that will say something along the lines of, well, actually, the specifications of Betamax were superior. Now, I don't know how much change was made to that 1979 5-page treatment and The Burning, which came out in 1981, the same year as the really quickly turned around but amazingly excellent Friday the 13th Part 2. But I guarantee you that the filmmakers were taking notes on the success of Friday the 13th and perhaps tooling their movie to be more in line with some of the fast setting conventions of the slasher movie. I'm going to mention right up front, and then I'm not going to talk about it again, I don't want to give a second more than I have to of this video, or a second's consideration to the disgusting rapist behind this movie. I want to talk about instead all the other good, decent people who worked on this movie and came together, so many people in front of and behind the camera, not just one fucking pig. So fuck him, and let's reclaim our slasher movie. I'm also probably going to be talking a lot about Friday the 13th and the Friday the 13th franchise as well, because it's amazing how quickly at this period the slasher became successful and then created a small cottage industry of pretenders to the crown, and how much Friday the 13th stole a march on everyone by more or less becoming the first to set the roller coaster, the popcorn standard on what we would understand the slasher to be. I understand that Halloween came before that. I understand that Black Christmas came before Friday the 13th. And I absolutely subscribe to the line of thought that says that the American slasher takes its lineage from the Italian giallo. But what Friday the 13th did was really monetize it, machine tool the slasher into a movie money machine, for better or for worse. So for me, it's interesting to see how even by 1981, Friday the 13th Part 2 is cementing some of those mainstays of the slasher, things we all expect now, whilst The Burning, slow off the mark from the Stardust Pistol, still has elements of it that allude back to the giallo rather than breaking new ground, for better or worse, like Friday the 13th did. It was Friday the 13th, the great white shark of American slasher movies. It didn't stop, did it? So the opening we get for The Burning is a prank gone wrong. Some kids at summer camp decide to get their own back on the drunk and mean caretaker Cropsy and accidentally end up, as you do, burning him alive. It reminds me instantly of the setup of another 80s slasher, Terror Train, and something that came a lot later but harkened back to those sort of classic slashers, Valentine. You start off with a prank, it goes wrong, someone gets severely fucked up, and then you jump forward in time and that someone is out for revenge. This someone happens to be Cropsy, who is the subject of a very popular, I understand, North American summer camp sort of ghost story, urban legend. I also understand that around about the same time a film called Mad Men was being made, who was also using the Cropsy legend, and they found out about the burning and then had to change their story. It seems like you can't throw a hatchet in the woods without hitting a film crew at this point in time who were killing kids off at summer camp. We jump in the burning to 5 years later. Cropsy didn't die but was severely burnt, has spent the last 5 years in hospital recuperating, and now he's being released back out into society with a very Italian, very Giallo-esque overdubbing of a sort of audio montage of all his consultants and surgeons telling him and advising him on finding a new path and a new life in the outside world, even despite his injuries. And we follow him very Giallo-esque. We see his feet. Later on we see his gloved hands. He's hiding his horribly burnt face, but he's in the classic Giallo sort of blood and black lace type getup. Black gloves, black shoes, black trousers, long black overcoat, black hat. I find it interesting that this story is still taking elements from its cinematic Italian forebears, where I think one of the reasons Friday the 13th was so successful was that it took what you could argue was maybe a cinematic meal and turned it into cinematic fast food. Friday the 13th became the McDonald's Happy Meal of slashers, machine tooled with sequel after sequel after sequel, machine tooled to within an inch of its life to cement this formula of the slasher in. It became so streamlined at doing what it did that Friday the 13th became an absolute juggernaut. I think there are other reasons Friday the 13th was more successful over The Burning. I'll talk about those in a bit. But I think that there are ways in which The Burning as a film, as an entity, is actually superior to Friday the 13th, Part 1. We follow Cropsy through the seedy sort of red light, porn cinema, sex show area of the city, and he picks up a lady of the night, goes back to her place, but the reaction she has when she sees his face leads him to kill her. I've always wondered, and tell me what you think, did Cropsy leave the hospital a killer, or was he really thinking, I might start a new life here, and do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get laid. And her reaction, and you can't blame her, but her reaction made him so mad he flipped at that point and then decided to go back to camp and start a bloodbath. Or do you think he was always a killer? Do you think he was out to try and find someone to kill? After this particularly nasty and fairly mean-spirited murder, we jump to the summer camp and we hang out with the kids. And one of the ways in which I think The Burning is superior to Friday the 13th, for a start, the summer camp's got kids in it. It's running, it's up and running. The only Friday the 13th movie that I can bring to mind that actually has kids at the kids' summer camp is Jason Lives. And with The Burning, we get to spend an awful lot of time with the kids. And on paper, that sounds awful, but it's one of the absolute strengths of The Burning. This cast of kids is excellent. They look like real kids. They act like real kids. They come in all shapes, all sizes. Okay, to a 21st century eye, certainly not all colours. But one of the things you don't mind doing, at least I didn't, is spending an awful lot of time with these kids and their interactions and their worries, and it feels like a real summer camp. Just look at the dinner scene when they're all in there en masse and the adults are trying to get their attention and it's just a rowdy noise. This is how kids are. It feels real. And yes, you do have actors who got their break in The Burning who would go on to bigger things. I know this is Holly Hunter's first movie. She doesn't have much to do in this film, but it's hard not to be taken in by especially Jason Alexander, but also Fisher Stevens. I know hindsight is a wonderful thing, and you know that these two young lads are going to go on to bigger success, but it's also true that you can see that they've got it. You like them, you like hanging out with them. Jason Alexander especially he's great. He lights up the freaking screen every time he's on. Fisher Stevens equally. And you don't want anything bad to happen to them. And likewise, there are other characters that you want their heads to be cut off, frankly. I think that's a lot more nuanced than cynically, as you get in later slashers, just lining up a group of horrible people so every 10 minutes you can go, yay, when they die. Fun as that is. Now, part of this realistic film of kids at summer camp is that at least the older ones that we hang out with are all obsessed with sex in some varying shape or form. Practically every conversation they have is about having sex, trying to coerce people into having sex, laced with double entendres about sex, who's going to hook up with who likes who. It's shot through it like a stick of rock, and there is a really sleazy undertone through it about male characters aggressively trying to coerce female characters into having sex with them. It is sleazy, it is icky, and unfortunately, it kind of has the ring of truth about it as well. How many other movies, let alone slasher movies, can you think about where they will dedicate a scene between a couple of young girls having an honest conversation about one of them not being able to decide whether or not she wants to lose her virginity with this other guy, and saying, quite honestly, sometimes I really like him and sometimes he scares me. That said, the nudity that had become de rigueur in slashers, thanks in a large part to Friday the 13th, is moved from the camp counselors now onto the kids. It's incredibly gratuitous. It made me feel uncomfortable. It made me feel uncomfortable for the actresses at the time, and stuff like that takes me out of the movie it's not welcome. Prog legend Rick Wakeman does the score for The Burning, and I can't help but feel that that's another little thread back to the Giallo. It was only the year before that Keith Emerson did the score for Dario Argento's Inferno. I wish more American filmmakers had taken up that mantle and run with it and put prog scores to horror movies. As a huge fan of Dario Argento, and especially the work of Goblin in conjunction with Argento, I just think that prog and slashers go together like bacon and maple syrup, like cheese and pickle. It's such a delicious combination. Horror filmmakers of the 21st century, I am putting you on notice. More progressive rock in your film scores from now on. So where the Friday the 13th movies, as I mentioned earlier, became machine-tooled, a murder every 10 minutes, we relax into this camp environment, and because the kid actors and their characters and essentially what we're being shown is so engaging, I don't mind spending all this time with all of these kids without a kill every 10 minutes, because I know the kills are coming, and I kind of like hanging out with some of these kids, and I hate some of the other kids, absolute douchebags, and I know they're going to get killed later on, so it's fine. And like an outburst of pent-up rage when the big kill set piece happens, and the killing at the camp really starts to happen during the raft scene. Boy, that just explodes everywhere, doesn't it? Some of the older kids are taking a canoe trip up the river. They're going to spend 3 nights away from camp in the wilderness. The first night that they camp, we start off with a campfire ghost story. Perfect. How ironic that in the same year, Friday the 13th Part 2 is going to mythologize Jason and explain the continuation of that franchise with another campfire ghost story. A group of them build a raft to try and get back to the camp to call for help, and instead they meet Cropsy in the raft attack, which is probably the jewel at the center of the crown of this movie, the set piece that everyone talks about, the set piece that leads to the, I don't like the word iconic a lot, but the shot of Cropsy holding aloft his garden shears, silhouetted, backlit by the sun, that's an iconic image. That is the burning. And this is where Tom Savini goes nuts. Tom Savini, who turned down working on Friday the 13th Part 2 because he thought the story was stupid. He didn't understand what the kid that drowned is now alive, and took his bag of tricks to the burning instead. Some of the gags he reuses from Friday the 13th, but the raft attack scene is him going all in out. A combination of his amazing effects and some really tight editing ramps up the tension as they're approaching this canoe, and then it just explodes in an orgy of violence that leaves you breathless afterwards. Where Friday the 13th stole a march on the burning, and not just by getting an earlier release, I think, is the charisma of its antagonist. We see Cropsy at the start of the movie, we see him throughout, we understand who he is. We actually get this sort of great kind of Cropsy vision where they literally put Vaseline around the edges of the lens, which to my mind just speaks to her but potentially impaired vision or cataracts or something like that from him being burnt alive. All of that stuff is great. Cropsy, though, as an antagonist, he's dull as ditch water, which is kind of insane because he's all the way through the movie, and you take Friday the 13th Part 1 and you don't know who the killer is. You don't see the killer until the very end of the movie, but then Betsy Palmer just, boy, she knocks it out of the park. You do not forget Pamela Voorhees. And then from Part 2 onwards, Jason, as stoic and absolutely silent as he is, has a vim and a vigour to him that sadly Cropsy just does not have. So unfortunately, by the very end, when we come full circle to A Campfire Tale the following year or a couple of years afterwards, talking about the legend of Cropsy and that he comes back again and again, even though there's more of a logical backdoor opening to further sequels than there ever was at the end of Friday the 13th, the first movie, you kind of don't care that much about Cropsy. It doesn't help that after the raft attack, and then there's one more really good kill set piece, the film builds to a climax which is it's a letdown. It doesn't fulfill on the promise that we've built up to by now. A really good promise of characters we know and have got to have known and care about what happens to them. But you get a finale which reeks of rewrites, dithering, not really sure how to end the movie, so that it is edited so poorly. A last minute decision was made that the final survivor, a boy against the normal traditions of the final girl, finds the body of one of the earlier victims, but that hadn't been written into the script, so a shot of her from her kill scene is inserted a couple of times. It's also scrappy and messy. It's in this abandoned mine environment that they found and decided to shoot around, so that kind of seems really random and scrappy. And there are scenes where a minecart starts off at the top of a ramp and then goes down to the bottom, and then you get a shot of it at the top again. It looks really as if they were trying to put something together in the editing suite because they didn't have an ending. I think if they'd have come out all guns blazing with an ending that matched the explosion and ferocity of the raft attack, we would have had a Burning 2, 3 and 4. No question. But by the end of 1981, Pamela Voorhees had made her mark. Jason Voorhees had made his first outing, and then he was going to cement his position in the Mount Rushmore of serial killers with Friday the 13th Part 3, 4. I mean, the chips were stacked against The Burning from the beginning. It just got steamrolled by a behemoth. Can you really blame it for not being able to stand up to the might of Friday the 13th and Jason Voorhees? Although, if you love the Friday the 13th films and have never seen The Burning and want something of a similar ilk that just gives a slightly different vibe, a slightly different take on similar material, The Burning is a fantastic slasher. There's a strange poetry to the movie that you won't find in Friday the 13th movies. The number of times that the score is allowed to just be silent, and the sound of cicadas or the crickets, the night, the water, the kids walking through the bracken creates the atmosphere. The times where the scenes of a bloody sunset reflected in the water or the red sky of dawn just counterpoints the blood and violence that we've seen moments before. There's a thoughtfulness and 360-degree approach to some of these characters that, and I'm smiling because I realise I'm talking about a stupid slasher movie. This isn't high art, but there's a care and attention that's gone into The Burning that you don't see in later slasher movies. And this is the McDonald's Happy Meal approach to slashers. And don't get me wrong, I love those kind of slasher movies. I love those cookie cutter ones. They're comfort food. Sometimes I want a McDonald's Happy Meal. But I think that with Friday the 13th and The Burning, you have the possibility of two doors that the slasher could have gone through, and history chose Friday the 13th, and it's really interesting to revisit The Burning, I think, and ruminate on what could have been if we'd have gone through the other door. Would we have got Scream? Well, there's a thought to end on.